So welcome everyone, and welcome to Professor Jeffrey Dunoff, the International Law Association, the Brazilian branch of the International Law Association, and the Federal University of Minas Gerais are very happy and honored to host today Professor Jeffrey Dunoff, that is a Laura Carnell Professor of Law at Temple University, Philadelphia. Professor Dunoff needs no introduction at the Federal University of Minas Gerais or in Brazil. He's widely known and recognized by specialists in the field, not only by his renowned cases and material textbook, but also his very influential 2013 edit volume with Mark Pollack on the interdisciplinary perspectives on international law and international relations, the state of the art. Moreover, at the UFMG, it's difficult to find a student who has not read his work on the judicial trilemma. A text not only reflects his original thinking about international courts and tribunals, but also offers a unique reading of Brazilian practice on investment agreements through this groundbreaking piece, The Arbitrator's Trilemma. In 2022, together with Mark Pollack, he edited the book International Legal Theory, Foundations and Frontiers. The book is a stimulating invitation to explore the different theories, approaches, and conceptual frameworks surrounding the discipline of international law. Dunoff and Pollack have brought together a team of experts who, with a high level of engagement, are able to present the perspectives of a particular way of thinking about the field and its epistemic communities. Not by chance, the book was adopted as the core text for the graduate course in international law at Minas Gerais graduate program and sparked many debates throughout this semester. Not about, of course, the undeniable merits of the book, but also about these theories and the way they offer instruments and tools to think about international law and its current structures. By the end of the book, one does not exclusively know more about the discipline. Rather, it becomes a powerful lens for reflecting on one's own way of thinking, writing, and practicing international law. So, Professor Dunoff, thank you very much once again for accepting this invitation. For us, it's a great honor to have you, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much for that really generous, over-generous introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm sure you've heard that from many speakers, but in this case, it's especially true. First, UFMG has such a rich tradition of excellence in international law, and one need only think of distinguished graduates like Kankando Trindade or Rezek, prominent faculty like Judge Leonardo Neymar Brandt, and now Professor Lima as a rising star in the international law firmament. So it's a great tradition. I also had the great pleasure of it's a little more serious because I actually think that the ties between the Brazilian and US international legal communities are not as strong as they should be. I would like to think that events like this, like visits by other foreigners from the US, can help contribute to building deeper scholarly and personal ties. So if I can play some small role in that, I'd be really pleased. So thank you so much for letting me join you this evening. All right, so you are now at the end of a semester on international legal theory. And at the end of a journey, it is sometimes useful to return to the questions you might have had as you embarked on the journey. So how can one best understand our field? What is international legal theory? What's the point of the enterprise? I think you've been debating these questions all semester. I'm not going to answer them in the next half hour or so, but I will try and touch on three broad topics. So first, First, I'm going to talk about the motivations for this project. Why did we do this book? What were the goals? Second, I'll address what is theory. It's a deceptively simple sounding question. I'll try to complicate it. And third, I'll talk about the book's content and structure a little bit, identify a few different ways to think about theory. Really the goal is to think about what's the best way to think about the field. What does each way reveal? What does each way obscure? And then I'll be really happy to open it up to conversation. So let's start with motivations and goals. Does the world really need another book on this topic? Mark Pollack and I had several motivations. First is just timing. It had been 2 decades since the last big project, at least big project in English. And that was an age-old symposium. It's highlighted 7 methods, which you can see on the slide. This appeared in the 1990s, a time of international law revival. It was before the events of 9/11, before the war on terror. There was an important critique of this symposium. My Temple Law friend and colleague, Henry Richardson, he wrote a letter to the editors, and he lamented the absence of critical race theory or Latino critical theory from the issue. His letter was effective because when the organizers later published the symposium in book form, there was a new additional chapter on third world approaches to international law. But in the intervening 2 decades, lots had happened, both in the world and in the academy. So we wanted to take stock of those changes. We saw a space, we saw a gap here. But when we began, we didn't know that Anne Orford and Florian Hoffman would be undertaking a very large edited volume. We didn't know Andrea Bianchi was preparing his monograph, or that B.S. Chimney was revising his work on theory. So as it happened, the space we wanted to fill would turn out to be not quite as empty as we thought. But I think that's a good thing. The books are important in different ways. So one motivation was really just to update thinking about theory. There was a second important motivation, and here I'll speak for myself. I had always been troubled by international law's problematic relationship with theory. The introduction quotes Ian Brownlee's quip that theory is one of the principal causes of low morale among international law students. The quote's funny, but the point is serious. Many leading scholars and practitioners treat theory as a wasteland, in Chimney's term. There's this deep instinct in the discipline to dislodge, displace, disparage theory, and that had long troubled me. So I wanted to intervene in this debate over the role of theory for international lawyers. And I can put this a little bit differently. It's a book about theory, but ironically, a key goal is quite practical, right? We wanted to have a reader-friendly, user-friendly book that would take stock of recent developments, explore key ideas, the challenges to the different approaches. We wanted each of the chapters to stand on its own as a freestanding essay, very much the way I think you read them week to week. But we also wanted the book as a whole to provide a synoptic overview of the field and to provide the reader with a solid grounding in the strengths, the limits of the various approaches. So we were hoping the book would be used the way you did. I hope you found it useful. And I hope you'll let me know during our discussion the extent to which it was useful and your thoughts about the way, it could have worked better. So we had these pedagogical goals. We also had some scholarly goals. We wanted chapters that would push the goalposts on theory, push the boundaries. And again, you'll be the judge as to whether the book succeeded in this or the other goals. Okay, let's think a little bit. What is theory? That sounds like a simple question, but it is not. When I was a student, I loved to read Hannah Arendt. She was interested in the life of the mind, the relationship of theory and practice, between thinking and doing. And in this context, she talks about this parable. It's ascribed to Diogenes. And it says, life is like a festival. Just as some come to compete, some to ply their trade, but the best come as spectators, so too in life. Slavish men go hunting for fame or gain, philosophers for truth. Huh? What should we make of this? She says it marks a sharp distinction between thinking and doing. She says that as a spectator, you can understand the spectacle, the festival, but the price you pay is you have to withdraw from it. And she notes that the Greek word for spectator is the root as the same word for theory. I'm not so sure that one needs to read such a sharp distinction between theory and practice. I agree that the role of a practitioner and that of a scholar differ, but I don't think this entails the conclusion that theory and practice inhabit totally separate realms, or that one has no relevance to the other. Pushed to its logical conclusion, this supposed opposition of theory and practice would deprive thought of reality and action of sense, rendering both meaningless. I think all practice unavoidably rests on theoretical presuppositions, even if they're implicit or unacknowledged. Our theories, our models, our preconceptions shape what we see, how we perceive, what we think. Theory provides the intellectual blueprint, which enables us to understand the world. It makes data comprehensible by providing a structure for the organization of a given discipline or body of knowledge. I think this point is even more important now than when the book was written. The book was drafted against the anxieties of the first Trump administration, of Brexit, of rising authoritarianism. These all remain serious threats, but add to them the additional threats of civilian devastation in Gaza, the fighting in Ukraine, US bombing of Iran. The current threats feel, I'd say, more violent, more chaotic, more dire. But these threats don't mean that theory is less important. It's actually the opposite. International lawyers need theory now more than ever to help make sense of our predicament. We need a conceptual compass in the stormy seas of current geopolitics. Okay, well, this begs the question, what exactly do we mean by theory? It may be helpful to think about two common answers. One would borrow from the natural sciences. So Anna Peters says theories should express the patterns or structures of the field under observation as parsimoniously and concisely as possible. So they should reduce complexity. They should simplify, right? So the goal of theory is to simplify. That's not wrong. Many theories try to simplify. Think about From Apology to Utopia. It tries to simplify international legal argument by identifying a small number of conceptual oppositions that can explain the larger universe of legal argumentation. And the book is so powerful precisely because it simplifies. But the relationship between theory and simplicity is, well, not so simple. Many important theories do try to simplify, but not all. So from the book, consider the chapter on third world approaches to international law. 12 is not about simplification. Rather, it seeks to complicate conventional European understandings about the discipline's origins and history. 12 scholars view those Eurocentric approaches as incomplete, as oversimplifications, and as misleading. Likewise, feminist approaches are not about simplification. The chapter on feminist approaches is all about diversity and complexity. So what's the point? Most straightforwardly, it's that different theories have different goals. Some indeed seek to simplify, others seek the opposite, to complexify. The larger point is less straightforward, but equally important. There are unavoidable trade-offs in doing different types of theory. So simplicity is useful, indeed, it's necessary, but too much simplicity, we get distortion, misrepresentation. Complexity is good, but only up to a point. Too much complexity makes a theory unwieldy and unusable. Stated a little more formally, we can say that there are trade-offs between a theory's extension, the range of cases that it covers, and its intention, its meaning, or its connotation. So there's no ideal or optimal level of abstraction or simplicity for theory. It really depends, what do you want to do? Let's consider another approach. It says the goal of theory is to frame questions in causal terms, right? To develop hypotheses and empirically test those hypotheses. Again, that's not wrong, but it's incomplete. This is one way to do theory, but it's not the only way. Why not? In part because international law is not a part of nature. It's not like the moon or the planets. It's a social institution. It exists because of the commitments, the beliefs of those who use it. It's a social practice. Law is a normative system. It seeks to advance common values. Knowledge of social institutions is fundamentally different than knowledge of natural phenomena. So the approaches of the natural sciences are not necessarily appropriate for legal theory. A number of chapters use what we might call hermeneutical or interpretive approaches. They're not interested, or they are interested, sorry, in identifying the motivations, the purposes of the relevant actors, their understandings, not simply their behavior. So thinking about normative systems like law is not simply about making predictions, but includes these other goals appropriately: description, explanation, understanding, justification, critique. I could go on, but I think the point is clear. Defining the activity and task of theory, let alone theorizing theory, is not simple. Theory is a contested term. It lacks a stable meaning. And international legal theory has a range of connotations. So one goal of the book is to show this complexity, to show that theory covers a variety of practices and functions and goals. And we wanted to highlight this richness, this pluralism, this complexity. We wanted to surface these complexities, not resolve them. Okay, let me quickly turn to the book's content and structure. At the start, anyone doing a book like this, you face a number of hard questions. What theories or approaches should you include? What theories or approaches do you necessarily, inevitably leave out? How do you classify the different theories? Who should you invite to draft the chapters? Should it be a author associated with the theory? Should it be a critic of the theory? The answers we landed on in this book are surely contestable. They would surely be different if we were doing the book today. But what we tried to do is select theories to try to map the field, to map the theoretical preoccupations of the discipline. But of course, like a map of the physical world, a conceptual map does more than simply describe. At the same time, it necessarily constructs. I can put this in slightly more sociological terms. In some sense, the book is an artifact, and here I've been inspired by some talented Brazilian scholars, one of whom might even be in the room here. The book actually reflects, Mark and my background and social networks and methodological affiliations. Some scholars have already talked about quite usefully how textbooks serve as markers and makers of international law. I think this is a really impressive research project, and it might be interesting to consider how or whether surveys of international legal theory, do they play a similar role, right? What would we see if we looked across these different works, either across time or across space? Would we find that, international legal theory is a global project with no national affiliations or features? Would we find that despite its universalist veneer, different overviews have decidedly national characteristics? So just as Anthea Roberts came to Brazil to discuss, whether international law is really international, we might ask whether international legal theory is really, truly international. So I'd be interested to hear from you about alternative ways to structure a volume like this. What approaches might have made this a stronger text? What approaches maybe should not have been included? Are there theories or schools of thought that would be of particular regional significance or particular interest to Brazilian readers? All right, so lest I get ahead of myself, let me just quickly return to the book structure and contents. So as you know, we start with the four traditional approaches: natural law, positivism, realism, and then the New Haven and international legal process schools as offshoots of realism. Second broad grouping is the critical approaches, critical international legal theory, trail, feminist approaches. I think virtually any book on theory would include these. The next group we included, I think, is a little more controversial. We include three new approaches, newer. They are global constitutionalism, global pluralism, and global administrative law. This cluster surely reflects, the times, that the time the book was organized. These were in ascendance, relative ascendance, really reflecting the post-Cold War era, the proliferation of courts and tribunals and institutions. These all have both descriptive accounts of this changing, the then changing international order, and normative visions of what that order could or should look like. And then a fourth category is these interdisciplinary approaches, rationalist, sociological, and interpretive approaches. By contrast with the other groupings, which were mostly developed by legal scholars, these approaches often involve the application of theoretical lenses and concepts from neighboring disciplines, and they've had an uneven reception, I would say, among international law scholars and practitioners. All right. Can I do something that US legal scholars love to do? We just talked about theory. We just categorized theories. And now I'm going to theorize a little bit about theory. I'm going to theorize a little bit about characterization. And I'm going to do it in a way that supports my claims that sometimes we theorize our way to simplicity, and sometimes we theorize our way towards complexity. So first, I'll just mention an alternative approach, an approach that seeks to simplify. So you could look at all these theories and you could say, there's another way to do this. We could distinguish between theories of law and theories about law. Or we might say we could distinguish between internal approaches and external approaches. What's the difference? Internal approaches say, there's a set of arguments, approaches, skills, forms of knowledge distinctive to law, and that are both necessary and sufficient to analyzing legal questions. So this would highlight the internal dynamic, the internal logic of legal principles and doctrine. This would see the purpose of theory as helping decide disputes, justify doctrine, advance the purposes of international law. So positivism would be one example. External approaches, in contrast, don't approach law like a professional practice or an academic discipline. Instead, they approach international law as a subject matter, best understood in relation to broader social or economic or political contexts. And from this perspective, any analysis of law would be incomplete without knowledge and methods from other disciplines like economics or sociology. So externalists would foreground the extra legal factors when analyzing international law. For some time, internal approaches were dominant. No more. I would say that the external interdisciplinary approaches have gained much ground, although I wonder a little bit whether that would be a movement among Northern tier scholars. So I was a little bit interested to see that a recent issue of the Brazilian Journal of International Law had a symposium about interdisciplinary approaches to business and human rights. So, I think there's this increased prominence of the interdisciplinary approaches so no longer be appropriate, maybe unlike 20 years ago or longer, no longer appropriate for this volume to focus exclusively on the internal approaches. And so a number of the essays actually in the volume try to navigate this divide and locate themselves somewhere along this continuum. Okay. Let me suggest very quickly one other way we might think about legal theory. And to do so, I'm going to use a term that's often associated with William Blackstone. So Blackstone, writing in the 18th century, argued that the common law had a dynamic where over time, law worked itself pure, right? Over a series of cases, judges would identify and advance the essence of the underlying doctrine. So over time, we get increased clarity. And that for him was one reason why common law was superior to legislation. Okay. But when it comes to legal theory, I want to take Blackstone's idea and I think we should flip it on its head. I don't think over time legal theories work themselves pure. Instead, we get the opposite. We get decreased clarity. The theories work themselves impure. Why is that? Most theories arise in response to earlier theories. They differentiate themselves. They have different distinctions, different concepts. They set out an alternative vision of the way law could work. And what happens? Critics begin to point out flaws, shortcomings in the theory, how the theory can't answer this or that question, how the theory would generate this or that bad result in one or another area. And then advocates of the new theory respond. And often they'll tweak or they'll modify their approach to take account of the criticism. That's good. It makes the theory more acceptable to more people, but it's also got a downside. The theory begins to get diluted. It loses its conceptual purity. And then this process of criticism and response, it repeats itself again and again. So over time, I'd suggest, legal theories do not work themselves pure. Instead, they work themselves impure. The new theory that promised to solve or transcend the contestation that infected earlier theories will itself begin to reflect its own form of contestation. And put even more strongly, we might ask whether theory can ever escape the conceptual conflicts to which they are a response. So maybe instead of resolving or transforming these conflicts, a new theory may come to recapitulate or reenact the underlying conflicts, not resolve them. Okay, end of interruption. Let me quickly finish up on the book. The final section, I think, is, to me, very interesting. There's two chapters on theory and practice. One is a public interview I did with George Abisab. It's a really quite fascinating set of reflections by someone reflecting on this relationship near the end of a very distinguished career. It has a very sophisticated approach to theory, but at times he draws a surprisingly sharp line between theory and practice. The other chapter here is by Laurence Voisin de Chazorn, another prominent scholar and practitioner and a former student of Abisab. I think you will know her, among other things, from her talk to the British branch of the ILA. And she says theory and practice are two sides of the same coin. So this part of the book provides a reader with two quite different views. And then there's a concluding chapter, consists of a dialogue between Joseph Weiler and the contributors, where Weiler poses questions and the authors respond. It's a really rich set of substantive exchanges, and I really strongly urge you to read it if you haven't already had the chance to do so. And as you read it, you'll see, I think the ideas just jump off the page. And I should just mention one other feature of the book that distinguishes it, I think, a little bit, to give the book a greater coherence and to get the different approaches in conversation with each other. We asked each author to address how does their approach, how does their theory address the crisis of international law. At the time, we were thinking of nationalist leaders, but the authors saw nuances to the question that we didn't. And the question became a little bit of a theoretical Rorschach test. Why is that? Well, In retrospect, it's obvious. The crisis, to identify the crisis of international law, it's not self-evident, it's not given, it's informed by the assumptions of a given theory. And again, here I'll go simplify. I think there's broadly two camps. One is authors who have, I would say, a commitment to the project of international law, and they see the crisis as challenges to that project, key actors who ignore, depart from, or try to overturn fundamental norms or rules or institutions. The second broad response is less concerned. The international legal order may be under stress. Instead, the concern is with the existing order's failure to provide acceptable responses to the planet's most important and urgent needs. So the crisis really is international law's role in creating or sustaining long-term structural challenges of global inequality and injustice. So the book doesn't try to adjudicate among the different conceptions of crisis, doesn't determine who gets it right, doesn't declare a winner among the various theoretical approaches. Really, the goal was to lay out the different approaches on offer, so you could see their genealogies and the contexts within which they arose, the challenges and critiques that they face, and to capture this richness, this plurality of international legal thought. Okay, so let me really quickly conclude. The book is a snapshot, like any book, it's a snapshot of a particular moment. The theories we include look quite different, I think, than those from the age-old symposium of 20 years ago. So maybe in another 20 years, it'll be time for another book. I'm not going to be organizing a book in 20 years, and most of the authors of this volume will not be writing in 20 years. So the editors and the contributors of that future book are going to be your generation of scholars. So you might read this book to get a good sense of current international legal thought and be in a position to write about what has changed in the next 2 decades. I might have one suggestion for those who might want to draft this book in 20 years. If I had one critique, it might be that it's maybe too conservative. Conservative in the selection of theories to cover, conservative in the sense of who was invited to contribute. They're all very accomplished, number of very senior, distinguished figures in the field. But although many of the chapters include important new insights, as a whole, it's not really a book about novelty or innovation. Indeed, I think innovation will come from the people in this room, from your generation of scholars. I can put this a slightly different way. I think it's the task of every generation to rethink and reconceptualize international law. And the way that disciplines work is that when you launch projects of disciplinary reform or criticism, you act within and against a received wisdom, a conventional vocabulary. This book, in some sense, reflects that conventional vocabulary. But it's not the last word. It's just one intervention. I hope it's a useful intervention, a productive intervention, although again, you're the judges. The real message is that there is important work to be done by the next generation of international lawyers. And so in this sense, the large is to suggest that theory is not a set of received truths. It's an ongoing dialogue. It's a continuing conversation. The dialogue is over an enduring yet evolving set of questions. The questions are hard, they're fascinating, they're urgent. The book is an invitation to a new generation of scholars, practitioners, and students, really all of you, to add their voices to that dialogue. So I will end where I started. I began by saying how happy I am to have this discussion with students and faculty at UFMG. I participated in launch events for this book at Sorbonne and at EUI. I was honored that people at those schools wanted to organize events around the book. But to speak only at those schools would run some risk, I think, of reproducing a rather Eurocentric view of international law. Not all worthy ideas or scholarship come from the global north. The conversation has to be expanded. I can think of no better place to do that than right here in Belo with you. So you'll permit me to conclude with a challenge and an invitation. Please join, please enlarge, please enrich this open-ended and unfinished dialogue. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, very much, Professor Dunoff, for this very exciting and I would say very engaging presentation about this book that I had two occasions to discuss with you. Once before when we met last year or 2 years ago in Paris, and right now, and I have to say that the second time that I read it, it was already changed for me, and especially when you have to discuss with other people and other audiences, it's a book that is able to change and is able to adapt. So I think that when you said that one of your expectations was reach different audiences, I think that it will in different times. And this is, I think it's fantastic, one of the many merits of the book. And right now we are going to stop the recording to go perhaps to one of the most exciting parts that I know that you really appreciate, that is the discussion about the book. So thank you once again for the presentation, and thank you all for you watching in the future this beautiful presentation of Professor Dunoff. And I would like to just record one more the fact that we are really grateful for this fantastic presentation. So now we stop.